because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like there's something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
In today's video, we're diving into one of the most fascinating discussions to ever appear on the Joe Rogan Experience. Joe Rogan sits down with Christian apologist and historian Wes Huff to tackle one of history's most controversial questions. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? As their conversation unfolds, you'll hear claims about eyewitnesses, Roman execution methods so brutal that survival was virtually impossible, and something even more intriguing. The earliest critics of Christianity didn't argue that Jesus never died. Instead, they argued something entirely different. Throughout this discussion, I'm going to pause the podcast at key moments and examine the historical evidence for myself. Rather than simply listening to the conversation, we'll compare what's being said with the writings of ancient historians, many of whom were not Christians and, in some cases, were openly hostile toward Christianity.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think so. As a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on for. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus's ministry, who were there, say at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. And this guy comes back.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion. And we know
brutal.
that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing atheist, agnostic, Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido. And it's probably from the end of the 1st century. And it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified.
Let's pause the conversation here for a moment. One of the biggest misconceptions surrounding Christianity is that the story of Jesus rests entirely on the pages of the New Testament. But that's not actually where the historical investigation ends. In fact, some of the most important evidence comes from writers who had no interest whatsoever in promoting Christianity. These were not pastors or apostles. They were Roman officials, historians, government administrators, and Jewish scholars writing within decades of the events they describe. And the first historian we're going to examine is perhaps one of the most significant of them all. Cornelius Tacitus was one of the greatest historians of the Roman Empire. He wasn't just a writer. He was a prominent Roman politician and senator who held several of the empire's highest-ranking political offices. During his distinguished career, he eventually served as a consul and later as the governor of the Roman province of Asia, located in what is now modern-day Turkey. Tacitus lived from approximately AD 56 to AD 120, placing him remarkably close to the events surrounding the rise of Christianity. Around AD 116, he wrote one of his greatest historical works, the Annals, specifically Book 15, Chapter 44. While describing the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64 under Emperor Nero and the brutal persecution that followed, Tacitus made several statements that have become incredibly important for historians studying the life and death of Jesus Christ. What's especially fascinating is that Tacitus was not a Christian. Quite the opposite. He viewed Christianity with open contempt. In his writings, he referred to it as a mischievous superstition. He had no desire to defend Christians or validate their beliefs. If anything, his personal opinion of them was overwhelmingly negative. Tacitus independently confirms the existence of Christus, Jesus Christ. He explicitly states that Jesus was executed during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. Now, instead of simply summarizing Tacitus' words, let's look directly at what he actually wrote. And it reads, "Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired." Now, whether you're a Christian, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, it's difficult to ignore the significance of a source like this. Remember, Tacitus isn't trying to persuade anyone that Christianity is true. In fact, he clearly despises the movement. Yet, even in his criticism, he acknowledges that Jesus was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, and that Christianity spread so rapidly that Nero considered Christians convenient scapegoats after the Great Fire of Rome. Now, let's examine someone from an entirely different background, a Jewish historian who lived even closer to the lifetime of Jesus. His name was Flavius Josephus, and unlike Tacitus, Josephus wasn't writing about Christians decades after they had spread throughout the Roman Empire. He was a first-century Jew whose lifetime overlapped with the generation that witnessed the birth of Christianity itself. That makes his testimony especially significant. Let's read what he says. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again, the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Whether you accept every line of this passage exactly as it appears today or not, there's something that both believers and many historians have discussed for generations. Josephus places Jesus within real history. He refers to him as a wise man. He describes him as a teacher who attracted both Jews and Gentiles. He states that Pontius Pilate condemned him to the cross at the suggestion of leading Jewish authorities. And he acknowledges that the followers of Jesus did not abandon him after his crucifixion. Instead, the movement continued to grow, so much so that Josephus could write that the tribe of Christians was still in existence in his own day. That observation alone is historically significant. Now we're going to hear from someone who is not simply writing about history after the fact. He was a Roman governor who actually dealt with Christians in his official capacity. His name was Pliny the Younger, and his testimony is particularly fascinating because he was not trying to write a history of Jesus. Instead, he was trying to solve what he considered a political problem. Pliny the Younger was a prominent Roman lawyer, magistrate, author, and civil servant. Throughout his distinguished career, he served as the Roman governor of Bithynia Pontus, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, under Emperor Trajan. As governor, Pliny found himself facing an unexpected challenge. Christianity had spread throughout his province, and increasing numbers of people were refusing to worship the Roman gods or offer sacrifices to the emperor. Unsure of how to deal with this growing movement, Pliny wrote a letter to Emperor Trajan asking for guidance. This was what he wrote about Jesus Christ and Christians. Let's read Pliny's own words. They affirmed, however, the whole of their guilt, or their error, was that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ, as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. Even this practice, however, they had abandoned after the publication of my edict, by which, according to your orders, I had forbidden political associations. I judged it so much the more necessary to extract the real truth, with the assistance of torture, from 2 female slaves, who were styled deaconesses, but I could discover nothing more than depraved and excessive superstition. As we come to the end of this discussion, one thing becomes clear. Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger were not followers of Jesus, nor were they writing to defend Christianity. Yet their writings independently confirm that Jesus was a real historical figure, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that within just a few decades, his followers had spread across the Roman Empire, boldly proclaiming that he had risen from the dead. While these ancient writers do not claim to have witnessed the resurrection themselves, they provide compelling historical evidence that belief in the resurrection was not a legend invented centuries later. It was the very foundation of the earliest Christian movement. Ultimately, each of us must decide what best explains the historical evidence. But one thing is certain, the resurrection of Jesus remains one of the most extraordinary and debated events in human history. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who would find this discussion interesting. Until next time, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.